Influenza A, better known as the flu, is a virus that has spread and killed like none other. Influenza A is also known to cause seasonal epidemics almost every winter in the US. Influenza A viruses can be broken down to proteins that are present on the surface of the virus, hemagglutinin and neuraminidase. There are currently 18 hemagglutinin and 11 neuraminidase subtypes, and together they form strains like H1N1 or H2N2. Influenza is transmitted through the air on tiny droplets formed when someone coughs, sneezes, or talks. Once inside the body, influenza spreads its RNA into cells where it is replicated. This process allows for more mutations as RNA has no proofreading system and is less stable than DNA. The flu infects people year-round, but infectivity rates peak around December and February in the US. Most scientists say this occurs because people stay inside more, causing more transmissions. Drier air also causes drier membranes inside the nose, which allows the flu to get in more easily. Symptoms of the flu may vary in severity, but primarily composed of a fever over 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit, aching muscles, headache, shortness of breath, and fatigue. The reason, however, why influenza is so deadly is because of an overreactive immune system response. When influenza is introduced to the immune system, it sends such a strong response to that influenza strain that perfectly healthy tissues are damaged and killed, resulting in organ failure. Most commonly, this happens in the lungs, which is why bronchitis or pneumonia are likely to develop after the flu. Early influenza was first described by Hippocrates, a Greek physician who mentioned a highly contagious disease from northern Greece around 410 BC. The term influenza, however, wasn't coined until 1357, when an epidemic broke out in Florence, Italy. The people called it influenza di freddo, which means cold influence. Then again in 1414, an epidemic broke out in Paris that affected around 100,000 people. The first recorded pandemic of influenza started in 1580. The virus was thought to have spread from Russia to Europe via Africa within 6 months. The actual death toll is unknown, but it is believed that some Spanish cities were nearly wiped out. The most famous pandemic, and perhaps the deadliest, occurred in 1918. It was the first pandemic to involve the H1N1 strain of the virus, and due to World War I being fought in Europe at this time, it spread quickly. The close-quarter combat and the troop movements of World War I likely sped up the transmission rate, while relatively advanced transportation systems at the time allowed the virus to spread to other continents. 3 major waves of the pandemic, known as the Spanish flu, were recorded. The first wave was thought to have originated from the US in the spring of 1918. There were few deaths from this wave, and it was only seen as a respiratory disease that circulated year-round. The second wave occurred during March and April and expanded across North America and spread to Europe as well, where it would devastate populations in the continent during the spring and summer. Finally, during late August, the strain changed to be more deadly and struck heavily in several ports that were near the North Atlantic Ocean. The Spanish flu ended up potentially infecting 1/3 of the world's population while killing an estimated 50 million people. In May of 1957, an influenza epidemic broke out in Hong Kong. It was later tracked back to China earlier in the year. It was then identified as a new strain of influenza, H2N2, and was referred to as the Asian flu. This new strain would rapidly spread throughout Asia, and then spread to Europe and America through numerous ports. It caused an estimated 1 to 2 million deaths worldwide. This strain continued to be the most prevalent strain for more than a decade, and was when many epidemiologists started considering methods of an early warning detection system. The most recent pandemic of the influenza virus was the H1N1 virus of 2009. This was the first major influenza outbreak of the 21st century. The strain was first traced to a small town in Mexico. The disease then spread quickly to Mexico City and then to Texas. From there, it was spread by plane to Spain, Austria, the United Kingdom, and several other countries. On June 11, 2009, WHO declared the influenza outbreak as a pandemic, and on August 10, 2010, the pandemic was declared over, with a reported 622,482 cases and 18,500 deaths from the WHO laboratories, although later on, it was estimated that 284,500 to 575,400 deaths could have occurred due to the influenza from further studies in countries like Asia and Africa. In 2017 to 2018, the flu season began in the US with high rates of emergency department visits and hospitalization rates, and would be classified as a high-severity flu across all age groups. This is largely due to reports saying that the flu vaccine was 36% effective earlier that year, causing many people to choose to remain unvaccinated. This led to more than 80,000 deaths in the US due to the flu, the highest in 4 decades. The influenza strain was first isolated in the early 1930s when Richard Shope discovered the influenza family of viruses, Orthomyxoviridae. This discovery was quickly passed on to a group of scientists headed by Patrick Laidlaw, where the influenza strain affecting humans was isolated. When World War II emerged in Europe, the US military knew that diseases were a threat that was potentially more dangerous than the enemies themselves. The Spanish flu had accounted for nearly half of all US military casualties during World War I. The US Army was quick to develop a network of federally coordinated vaccine programs with top universities, hospitals, private foundations, and labs to find vaccines to numerous diseases, including influenza. By 1944, Thomas Francis Jr. and Jonas Salk had created a vaccine that included a killed version of influenza. A flu vaccine was soon licensed for troops in 1945 and was released to civilians in 1946. In January 1976, an H1N1 outbreak in Fort Dix, New Jersey, caused 1 death and hospitalized 13. Although small in comparison to pandemics, this led to a mass immunization program being established due to a fear that another pandemic was coming. President Gerald Ford spearheaded this by announcing a plan to vaccinate everyone in the country. This was soon shot down as it gained little federal support while garnering little support from the public when it was discovered that some vaccinations led to Guillain-Barré syndrome, a life-crippling paralysis. Today, the flu shot now contains 3 to 4 strains of influenza, with the WHO determining which strains to include. It's mainly been a guessing game due to the amount of influenza strains and its ability to mutate quickly. Despite this, the flu shot normally decreases the risk of flu by around 40 to 60% and normally targets H1N1 strains. Due to the effectiveness, the flu shot campaign has been led by several governmental programs and health organizations to prevent a future outbreak. Influenza has killed unlike any other virus. It has been existent as far back as the ancient Greeks and is still infecting hundreds of thousands of people today. As the medical field continues to expand, the influenza death rate seems to have stabilized throughout the years. However, with the events of the 2009 swine flu pandemic and the 2017-2018 flu season in the US, many medical experts are left unsure on the potential to decrease the number of infections. Yet with all the destruction and frustration that influenza has brought to society, it has led to great advancements in the medical field. Institutions like WHO have made databases on tracking influenza, and that technology has since been passed down to other diseases as well. Jonas Salk, one of the doctors responsible for the first flu vaccine, also went on to invent the polio vaccine. WHO recently announced that in order to prevent influenza, they are starting to emphasize the role that each individual country plays. They also stated that they will integrate broader controls for prevention, control, and preparedness for all countries, and to attempt to integrate programs with national security and universal health coverage. The WHO still takes the stance of, the question is not if we will have another pandemic, but when. Influenza has been the cause of mass carnage and is the 7th leading cause of death around the world. Efforts have been made and will continue to be made as scientists continue to work to eradicate influenza. Only time, however, will tell if these efforts will be enough.